Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, I chat with Anna Burgess Yang. Anna is a former product manager turned content marketer and journalist. Now, she left an executive role in Fintech to pursue solopreneurship. Let's go check out her story. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Anna Burgess Yang. Anna is a Fintech and product writer and remote work evangelist. Now, after spending 15 years at a software company, she decided it was time for a career pivot. Now, she is a successful solopreneur and focuses on writing about financial technology and banking. She's also passionate about equipping people to take control of their workflows, their money, their remote teams, and their careers. And I'm really excited to have her join the show today. So hi, Anna. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So now let's get some background before we kind of discuss how you made this really big pivot during the pandemic. So how about you tell us a little bit about, your upbringing and where you currently call home now?
I am from a very small town in western Wisconsin, absolutely beautiful part of the country. Ended up going to college there and really just enjoyed the area, and I was an English major. Writing was always what I was passionate about. But now I live in a suburb of Chicago, so a complete change from where I grew up. But I really like it here as well. It's a great area.
No, that's nice. And what are some of the things that you've been passionate about professionally?
So by accident, I found out that I'm really excited about technology. And kind of making things run optimally, quickly, making teams more efficient, which is not maybe what people think of when they hear that I'm also a writer. But I'm kind of a weird blend between those two things. And I learned that pretty early in my career that I like technology.
No, very nice. And how did you get into Fintech? And for those who might be unfamiliar with the term, explain what Fintech is.
Fintech is financial technology of a lot of varieties. So it could be anything from banking technology to financial related apps that you use on your phone. So I got into that also a little bit by accident. I started working as a bank teller when I was 16, and that was my very first job. I worked at a community bank in the small town where I grew up, and that really introduced me to banking. And I stayed there through college and worked through loan operations and loan processing and used technology to enable my job. So when I was done with college and trying to think, what else do I want to do with my life? I ended up applying at the company whose technology I had been using for a few years and said, I am an end user. Are you hiring? I really like this software and I think I could help other banks learn how to use this product. They were hiring. And so my first role at that company was an implementation specialist. And I ended up staying there for 15 years.
Wow. Now that talk about being that end user, then actually going to work for the space. I mean, they must have been like chomping at the bit to get you in there. So that's awesome.
A little bit. Yeah. Banking is a tough field. It's very highly regulated. You need a lot of knowledge to work in it. And so for me to come in and then go into other banks and say, not only am I going to teach you how to use this software, but I was you. I can sympathize with what it's like to bring on a new piece of technology throughout the entire bank. It was a good role for me.
Absolutely. No, that's really cool. And so, part of the show, I truly don't have a show without the pandemic, right? And so would love to kind of take you back a little bit, right? And so let's go back to March of 2020, where we're really introduced to COVID. Talk to us a little bit about how the pandemic affected you.
So I was at the Fintech that I had started at, and I'd been there, like I said, for 15 years. I had been a remote employee almost my entire time there. I started working remotely only 6 months into my tenure at that company. So working remotely was not new to me. When the pandemic hit and around that mid-March timeframe, the schools in Illinois closed and we didn't know how long. So what was new in my remote work experience was having 3 small coworkers at home. And at the time, my children were in 4th grade, 2nd grade, and a 2.5-year-old.
Oh my gosh.
My husband had also been working remotely prior, but we suddenly found ourselves needing to juggle parenting, helping the kids connect to Zooms all day long for their school, and still getting our jobs done. So it was stressful. It was pretty much an understatement, but it wasn't a unique experience to me. I mean, I think every parent was stressed out. The really hard part was not knowing how long that was going to last. And as it turned out, my kids were home for almost a year.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, mine were young at that time as well. And some of the remote work opportunities, not remote work, sorry, but the remote learning that they had to go through. One of them was like pre-K. And we were like, what's the purpose of even sitting online? But we had to sit there online with them, and my wife did. And, whenever we would kind of balance it out, it was just like, this doesn't make any sense, like, at all.
Yeah. And, my youngest was 2.5. There's not much you can do with a 2.5-year-old. There's no real learning going on. It was just, what can we possibly do with her during the day to keep her occupied while we're trying to do other things? And getting emails from the teacher saying, hey, why isn't your 4th grader joined music class yet? And then trying to figure out where he was or what he was doing in his room, which was not joining class. So it was very, very rough.
Oh, I bet. And so what were some of the things that you started to learn during this time?
I've always said that I appreciate work-life balance. And as a very long-time remote employee, I'd always touted that that was something I was proud of in my career, was being able to juggle working remotely and my job. But suddenly my kids had to come first during the workday. There were always times when I'd flex, they'd be sick or something would happen. I'd say my family comes first, but this was all day, every day, where I had to meet their needs while also trying somehow to meet the needs of my job. And so I think it really shifted priorities for me in, what do I need from an employer? What kind of understanding do I need in terms of what's possible during the workday? Because what was possible before and what was possible during that time were 2 completely different things.
Oh, great. And so how did, knowing that and being in that space, how did then the pandemic start to really affect your relationship with your job at that time?
So I was at the time part of a 3-person executive team. The other 2 both had much older children. The CEO had a son that was an adult, and the other person had a daughter that was a senior in high school. So their experience was completely different than mine. And I was managing a team of 7, most of whom had small children. So my team was suffering as much as I was in what was expected. And I found myself not only trying to manage my work, but also trying to manage the expectations of the executives with what was possible from my team. If they couldn't get their job done, I kind of was this buffer between them. Like, they're doing the best they can. Some of them had quite a few children, small children at home that they were trying to manage. And I think it was probably around July when the CEO in particular kind of wondered aloud why things weren't back to normal yet. Why the interactions with the customers, that were banks, why were things still moving slowly? Why were sales moving slowly? Why was implementation moving slowly? And, my response to that was, people, anybody that has children, we're still dealing with this. We haven't moved on from this pandemic yet. It was even harder in the summer. There was no school, nothing available.
Yeah.
So, I remember feeling incredibly frustrated just with his lack of awareness about what parents were going through. And it started, I think, to open my eyes a little to things that had been going on at the company for a while and I had just ignored. or dealt with, because it was kind of the only thing I was dealing with. But now I was dealing with my job and my kids during the day, and my tolerance for managing those types of things went way, way down.
Oh, I get it. And so looking back, what's one thing you would have done differently during the pandemic?
I really don't know. I think I did the best that I could. I probably would have given myself a little more grace. There were times as a parent when I was just beating myself up, feeling like I was failing my kids and not able to be there for them in what they needed. And I think I would have just said, you know what, we are all doing the best we can. And maybe I would have pushed back a little sooner on my job rather than struggling for as long as I did with trying to balance everything.
That makes sense. And so look, after being in that fintech space, like you mentioned, for about 15 years, you then resigned to now pursue content marketing and journalism. So ultimately, why did you leave your job during the pandemic?
I think it was around October of 2020 when I started to seriously think about leaving. There still did not seem to be an end in sight to the pandemic. I didn't know how long my kids were going to be home. And I had just reached a breaking point with everything at the company. Like I said, it really illuminated some toxic behavior among employees. Those were magnified. Mm-hmm. I was stressed out enough as a parent. And so to deal with some of the personalities, some of the decision-making that was going on, it was too much. But then I looked at product management jobs. At that point, I was managing the customer success department and also the product manager for the company. And I realized that in staying with one company for so long, that I wasn't sure I had some of the necessary skills to stay in tech. I think I felt or that it would be a lot to try to catch up on some of the things that were expected as a product manager. And so I wondered, could I acquire those skills? Maybe. Do I want to at my age and in the middle of a pandemic? Mm-hmm. If I'm going to start something new, why not just completely start something new? Why not do something totally different? I had never heard of content marketing. Truly. I didn't know that was a career that companies paid people to write for them. So somehow in my job search, I tripped across content marketing as a role, but realized very quickly that there was no way I could get a job without a writing portfolio, and I didn't have one. My personal blog probably didn't count. So I started freelancing on the side for a content agency. So in addition to my job and being a parent, I was also writing early in the morning, late at night, doing whatever I could to start building a portfolio in the hopes that eventually I'd have enough where I felt comfortable applying to full-time content marketing jobs.
Oh, that's nice. And was there, a kind of a pivotal moment that influenced, you to make this decision, to leave? I mean, I know you started seeing some traits of toxicity and things like that, but was there a one thing that was like, you know what, this is it?
There was. My time frame for leaving kind of changed several times. I thought, well, maybe I can make it to the end of the school year. Maybe I can make it another couple years, or something. But I kept shifting that up little by little because I could tell that I was hitting a breaking point. But then in December, I had been working on a marketing project internally and presented it to the CEO. It was exactly what had been discussed. And he said, nope, don't like that. Just do it all over again. And at that moment, I truly snapped. I couldn't stand the fact that everything I was being asked to do and then to just on a whim be told, nah, just try again. And so I got off a call. I talked to my boss. I said, I don't care what happens to this project. I'm not putting any more work into it. Later that same day, I found out that my grandmother passed away.
Oh, where's that?
And it was not unexpected. She was 100 years old and had been in hospice. And I'd kind of been waiting for that phone call. But I really felt like she and I both made decisions to move on that day. We both needed a change. I ended up leaving a month later, but I knew the date that I was going to be done. On that day in December, I had an exact end date in January in mind where I knew I would be handing in notice and I would be done.
Wow. And now when you actually go to that decision, go to that date in January, and now, at the D-Day, if you will, right? How did it impact you to make this decision and then actually do it?
So that morning, I went for a walk. It was surprisingly a nice day considering it was January in Chicagoland.
I was about to say, outside.
I did. It was an oddly beautiful day, and I walked around, and then I had a call that was a regular call with my boss to just discuss, our regular touch base. And I told her that I'm leaving the company. And at the time, I did not have a job lined up. I had been interviewing, and I was very close to the end on a few, but I did not have a job. And I said, I'm done here. I'm leaving the company. And she was kind enough to say, I respect you enough that I'm not going to try to convince you to stay. I think she knew that I had reached that breaking point. I'd been talking to her about it for a while. So I appreciated that it wasn't a really difficult conversation, that I was able to say, I'm just at the end of what I can do here and I need to do something else.
It's always good to have that a supportive leader like that, who definitely understands kind of what you're going through. So tell us a little bit about, what has happened since you left.
I ended up getting an offer from a content agency just a few days after I turned in my notice. So that was great. And I also landed a role as a freelance journalist for banking publication. Someone that I knew had connected me. It was a great fit. So I dove into this world of content marketing and writing mostly for tech companies. So I stayed at a content agency for about 8 months. It was not a good fit for me with writing all day, every day. It was very intensive, very focused on how much output you had. And there were parts of my prior life that I missed, kind of making the decision-making aspect that I had as a former executive. Some of the operational stuff was missing from this company. It was a little chaotic at times. And so I missed kind of the ability to really, influence workflows or make things improve processes. So I decided that, I quit once. I guess I can quit again. The second time, I did have a job lined up. I got a job as an account manager running sales at a content agency. Did that for a year. Realized that was not a good fit for me either. I do not have any sales experience. So ended that job and somehow ended up in freelance life, which if you had talked to me even back when I left my job the first time in early 2021, I would never have expected that this is where I'd be today. I still thought I'm gonna be at a company. I like the stability, but here I am out on my own.
What has it been like pivoting multiple times at this stage in your career, right? Because 15 years at one place is nothing to sneeze at, right? And so, tell us about how these movements at this stage in your career have really impacted you.
I think for a while I was selling myself short because I was the newbie. I didn't understand content marketing in the way that other people did. I didn't understand metrics and analytics and all of these things. And I was surrounded by great writers who had a ton of experience. So there were a lot of moments when I really felt inadequate. But I realized the more that I worked, even in a new industry, that I did bring skills to the table from my prior career. I had experience with decision making. I had experience with managing a team. But then 2 jobs later, I realized that what was going to make me the most happy was controlling my own work and having a decision, deciding what clients to work with, having a say in the type of work that I took on. That was what was going to make me happy, not working for someone else and being subject to other people's whims, desires, thoughts about how the company should be run.
No, that makes perfect sense. And that's actually a great transition into kind of now what you're doing currently. So tell us more about your company, Anna Burgess Yang.
So myself, and I. So I write mostly for tech companies, and I still do journalism, writing for banking publications. And turns out that combination of fintech and writing is a very specific skill set, and that not a lot of writers have. There are a lot of writers out there who can write about sales and marketing and e-commerce and things like that. But because banking is such a regulated industry and has a very knowledgeable audience, the audience can tell if you don't know what you're talking about. I've had a lot of business, which has been great. So mostly companies find me through LinkedIn. I'm very active there. And so most of my work is inbound with people asking if I'm available to help with blog posts, ebooks, white papers. And I'm really able to lean into that community banking that I talked about in the beginning, that experience that I've built up over basically my entire career. So it's work I enjoy, and I'm able to really write the way that I want to, which I like. On top of that, I have a Substack. I'm on Medium. I have a newsletter. So I write a lot.
Yeah. Oh, I've noticed, right? I've noticed you are very active, but I love it because the content. I mean, look, I'm no fintech expert. I'm not even, I don't even call myself a novice, right? But like whatever below that is. But I find your content really interesting because it's informative, right? And so for things that and there's so much happening right now in the banking industry, right? I don't. That's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down. But I think that type of content, you're right. Like you found like your niche, right? And that's important. And so when you think about that and now recognizing these feelings, what has been the most like rewarding experience for you about launching this new venture?
I think it's being acknowledged for expertise that I have in financial technology and some other areas of technology. I don't feel like the newbie anymore. I feel like I'm a very skilled writer that can offer things that other writers can't. And, working at a company for 15 years, I felt the same way. I was the go-to person internally. I was the person that had all of the answers about the product because I knew it so well inside and out. And so those feelings I had of not knowing what I'm doing or being new to the content marketing industry or new to the journalism, that's all gone now. I feel like the clients that I work with really respect the work that I do. I'm doing work I enjoy, and I have time for these other projects, Substack, Medium, everything else that I do in a way that I think I didn't before, or maybe just didn't make time for. Either way, I'm able to put the energy into those things.
No, that's great. And now when you think about this process as a whole now, right? Let's think about this whole journey. What have you learned the most about yourself throughout this entire process?
I've wondered, why didn't I go out on my own sooner? Why did I wait? Why did I stay at this company so long? And there were a couple of things in play. One, the company was remote, had been since 2010. So, and I enjoyed the flexibility that I had, especially as a parent. And there weren't as many companies that were fully remote at the time. So in a way, I felt trapped or appreciative. And once the pandemic hit and so many companies began working remotely, I realized, okay, I don't have to stay with one employer anymore. And that's, the crux of your show is that you don't have to stay with an employer. And so that's one thing I learned, that job hopping is fine. Find what works for you. Mm-hmm. Get out if it's not the right thing for you and keep going. And then the other piece is being, going out and becoming self-employed. That I also wonder, like, why didn't I do that sooner? But I'm not sure my younger self would have been ready. I think, at the time that I graduated from college and had an English degree, there were not a lot of options for writers.
Right.
Content marketing didn't exist.
Right.
I could have written for a newspaper or written a book, and neither of those were appealing to me. So I think it had to be this right combination of what's available now for online writers and do what do companies expect from high quality content. So maybe I hit at just the right time in my career, and a time when maybe I'm a little okay with not knowing what comes next, because certainly that happened during the pandemic. There were so many moments when we didn't know what was going to come next. So I'm more comfortable with that.
That's great to hear. And this next section of the show is one of my favorite sections, because really the listeners get a lot out of this. And it's really this advice section, the advice section. And so when you think about those who may be listening, there's a stat that I want to read to you and get your thoughts on it, because you are a former executive, right? So in 2022, there was this Deloitte study that showed that about 70% of high-level executives are considering quitting their jobs to focus on their well-being. Okay. So now when you think about this, for executives who might have a similar situation to yours, but are unsure what to do next, what would you suggest that they do?
I think it depends on your own risk tolerance. I've said that, before when people ask me, like, should I quit my job? I have always been risk averse. I really have been. The pandemic changed something in me and made me take that leap. But I think, for people that aren't sure or not, a lot of executive roles are well paying and you don't know what to do about that. I would say if you're going to go out on your own, do something on the side first, consulting, something, because it's not always clear what that next step is going to be. And I freelanced, alongside my job for a while before making that leap. And so that decreased the risk a little bit for me, was knowing that I had some work built up. So, but I say, if you've got that itch, it's never going to go away. If you think you're going to leave, you're just going to keep thinking about it and keep thinking about it. So I would say you have to start thinking about how much risk are you willing to take and what does that next step look like for you?
I like that. And what more do you think employers could be doing to better support employees and really specifically parents right now in the workplace?
Yeah, I'm lucky that my youngest is now 5 and in kindergarten, but from a lot of people that I hear that have younger children, childcare has just become a disaster. Shortages everywhere, more expensive than ever. And so I think that flexible work has got to be such a high priority. It's not just remote work. My spouse works a remote job. It is not a flexible job. He sits in front of a computer from 9 to 5 every day. And that's not quite the same thing. I mean, it's helpful, if the kids are sick or things like that. It's not quite the same as really having control over how work gets done. Is it asynchronous work? I'm a big proponent of that. Letting people work early in the morning or evening if that's better for them, and it's better, if they can manage their childcare situation better. So I think people have to figure out what collaboration can look like going forward in a way that still makes sense for people. There's just so many opportunities to support parents and truly anybody with flexible work.
Absolutely. And I like that you raised that point, because that's a lot of the rub that we're seeing right now, right? You see a lot of these mandates across, I'm in New York, right? I'm sure it's very similar in and around Chicago, of organizations forcing team members to come back. And there's this clash that's happening now about, well, why? Because what was I doing differently at home? Productivity still same, as opposed to me being in the office. And obviously the argument is around, there's got to be somebody who justifies the real estate spend, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, because you're right, this flexibility piece is really key.
So interesting story there. In 2021, before I quit the second time of my job, my husband was working in a role that he'd been in for about a year. He had also gotten a job during the pandemic. The company had not been remote prior, was remote during, and then in about July of 2021 said, hey, we think you're going to come back into the office 3 days a week. And he'd never set foot in their office. And it was nowhere near where we live. It would have been a very long commute each way every day. And he's a software engineer. And so he's like, no. And he went and found another job easily. And so I think we've continued to see this shift where I've even heard stories where people just don't show up. The bosses order them back into the office and they don't go. And so I wonder how that's going to play out, because you're right. They get a taste of, I can be just as productive or more productive at home. Maybe going to the office once a week, maybe once every couple of weeks, maybe once for just a meeting. But I don't have to have my life there. I get so much more out of it when I'm at home. And so I think we're going to continue to see shifts as people refuse to go back.
I agree.
They don't want to give up that flexibility.
Oh yeah. Yeah. If there's one thing we know about, and this is obviously specifically, everywhere, but I'm specifically US, right? But people who live in the US and their freedoms, right? They don't give those up very easily. So this will be a very interesting fight to watch. So now, last question for you, when you think about kind of what's next for you, what type of impact are you hoping to have in this next chapter of your professional life?
Something that I talk about, pretty regularly on Substack and LinkedIn is that work shouldn't suck. It just shouldn't. And there are so many other options out there. As I mentioned earlier, people shouldn't be afraid of job hopping or, trying a side hustle to see if they like something else. I'll put myself in the elder millennial category. And I was raised that you're loyal to a company. If you do right by them, they'll do right by you. You should stay there. You should climb the ladder. You should, get promoted. I think that's not the case anymore, or people are realizing that it's not the case anymore. And so I think more of a career as a portfolio of experiences. You get a little bit from a lot of different things that you do. And so that's something I kind of talk very passionately about, is that work shouldn't suck. Find something that doesn't suck, whether it's another employer, whether it's going out on your own. But everyone deserves to have a job that makes them feel good.
Yeah, I like that, by the way, that career portfolio analogy. I like that a lot. I may take that. that's a good one.
Right, because you think of like your resume, it's just a list.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's just you go from point A to point B on your resume. But if you think about a portfolio and showcasing all the different things that you do, and maybe it's not just your job, maybe it's your volunteer work, maybe it's work that you do with a community organization, or maybe it is your side hustle. But it's this collection of experiences that make up who you are. And so I think that people have to start seeing themselves that way, not just as a list of skills or boxes to check off when they apply for a job.
Absolutely. I had an interview actually earlier in the season where I talked with an author, it was Tracy Brower. She talked about this concept around dimensionality, right? And how us bringing these multiple dimensions into the workplace make us better workers, right? Because we tap into outside forces. We obviously there's things that we generate positively from the actual work experience. But you're right? Volunteerism, side hustle, whatever the case may be, they make us that whole person. So with that concept and this concept of a portfolio, it kind of meshes very nicely for me. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Well, look, this was a great conversation, and I appreciate you taking some time to join us today, and also sharing your story. Right, multiple hops during the pandemic, elder millennial to elder millennial. I hear you. Okay, I get it. Right, completely understand, and would love for you to share where people can support you.
Absolutely. So you can find me at annabyyang.com. or on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find, Anna Burgess Yang. There are not many people with that name. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one. And either of those places would point you in the direction of all of my other work. So Substack, Medium. So I would encourage people to come find me. I love to connect with people. I love to chat. So
awesome. Well, thank you for that info. That'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Anna Burgess Yang for joining me today. I'll be sure to put all her information, the Substacks, everything place that you can find her in our show notes. And look, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you next time. Anna, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.